Some killers become infamous because of one shocking crime. Others leave behind a trail so long that investigators spend years trying to understand its true scale. This story explores several of the most prolific serial killers discussed in the source transcripts. Men and women whose confirmed murders, confessions, or suspected victim counts reached horrifying numbers. Behind every statistic, however, was a real person whose life ended without warning. And sometimes, the most disturbing part was not simply how many people were killed, but how long these offenders remained hidden in ordinary society. One of the most striking examples was Mikhail Popkov, a former police officer in Siberia who secretly became a murderer while investigating crimes himself. He reportedly targeted vulnerable women, sometimes offering them rides before attacking them. For years, his position helped him remain above suspicion, allowing him to examine crime scenes connected to his own crimes. Eventually, evidence involving his patrol vehicle and DNA testing of thousands of officers brought investigators directly to him. Popkov's conviction did not immediately reveal the full extent of his crimes. He was convicted of numerous murders in separate trials, while additional confessions continued to push the known total higher. Investigators believed the real number could be considerably greater. But even Popkov himself reportedly said he could not remember exactly how many people he had killed. That statement captures one of the most unsettling realities of serial murder. Sometimes the final number is not a complete answer, but only the portion investigators were able to prove. Another notorious case came from the Soviet Union, where Andrei Chikatilo operated between 1978 and 1990. His victims included women and minors, and investigators struggled for years to stop him. A flawed blood type test once excluded him as a suspect, while false confessions complicated the investigation. His eventual arrest came after a patrol officer noticed suspicious behavior near a railway station. Surveillance and further evidence finally connected Chikatilo to the murders, leading to his conviction and execution. Then there was Charles Cullen, a nurse who spent years working inside hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. To patients and colleagues, he appeared to be someone whose job was to care for vulnerable people. Investigators later concluded that he had secretly caused the deaths of patients using medications. Cullen claimed he believed he was ending suffering, but investigators found that some of those victims were not terminally ill. His explanation could never erase the devastating reality faced by their families. Cullen's crimes finally began to unravel in 2003. After another nurse helped detectives expose what was happening, he eventually pleaded guilty to 29 murders, while experts believed the actual number could have been far higher. Perhaps most disturbing was the institutional failure surrounding him. Hospitals repeatedly allowed Cullen to leave jobs despite suspicions, meaning warning signs were not always followed by the action that might have protected future victims. Albert Fish represented a very different kind of terror. During the 1920s, he was able to move through ordinary life while secretly committing horrific crimes against children. He reportedly kidnapped and murdered victims before returning to an apparently normal existence. For years, nothing connected him to the crimes. Then, in 1934, a disturbing letter sent to the mother of Grace Budd gave detectives a crucial lead. Investigators traced the stationery to a boarding house and eventually arrested Fish was convicted for Grace Budd's death and confessed to other killings, while making additional claims that were difficult to verify. His case demonstrated another grim problem in historical investigations. When victims were vulnerable or overlooked, crimes could disappear into the background for years. The surviving evidence surrounding Fish became part of one of America's darkest criminal cases, and his execution in 1936 marked the end of a life that had left investigators struggling to separate proven crimes from his many claims. The transcript also describes Miriam Silicotus, a woman who allegedly hid exploitation behind the image of a religious leader. She operated a Greek convent that promised care for vulnerable people, including women, children, and tuberculosis patients. Suspicion grew after a woman's will appeared to have been changed in the convent's favor. The investigation intensified when authorities traced a missing teenager to the location, eventually leading officers to raid the convent in 1950. Inside, investigators reportedly found severely neglected residents and dozens of children being kept there. Prosecutors eventually connected Silicotus to at least 177 deaths, while authorities at one point considered a much higher possible total based on property records. The case remains a reminder that danger does not always appear frightening from the outside. Sometimes it wears the face of authority, trust, religion, or compassion, and that appearance can make victims even harder to protect. Another disturbing case involved Dr. Kermit Gosnell, whose Philadelphia clinic became the focus of a major investigation, what authorities initially expected to be a routine drug-related investigation, reportedly uncovered deeply disturbing conditions, including improperly stored fetal remains and evidence of illegal medical practices. The investigation also found evidence connected to the death of a patient and led authorities to examine years of activity at the clinic. Gosnell was eventually convicted in 2013 of multiple serious offenses, including 3 first-degree murder convictions involving infants born alive, as well as involuntary manslaughter and other crimes. He received multiple life sentences without parole. The case raised difficult questions about oversight and how such practices could continue for years without adequate intervention. The transcript states that Gosnell died in prison in 2026, long before many modern serial killers became household names. The legend of Thug Behram spread across colonial India. According to the source, he was associated with groups of thuggy robbers who gained the trust of travelers before attacking them. British authorities eventually moved against the organization through informants and widespread arrests during the 1830s. Behram reportedly confessed to personally killing many victims, while later, historical claims placed his involvement at a dramatically higher number. But that enormous figure has been disputed by modern historians, who consider it improbable. The distinction between documented history, confession, legend, and later exaggeration becomes especially important in centuries-old cases. What can be said with greater certainty is that the story of Thuggee became one of the most enduring criminal legends associated with colonial India. Behram's reported execution in 1840 brought an end to his story, but not to the questions surrounding how many victims were truly connected to him. In Colombia, another predator was linked to the disappearances of vulnerable young people. Luis Garavito reportedly approached victims while posing as someone who could offer gifts, money, or opportunities. His crimes remained difficult to uncover, partly because many victims came from disadvantaged backgrounds and were not always reported missing. In 1999, an escape by a young survivor finally gave authorities information that helped lead to his arrest. While later forensic evidence strengthened the case against him, Garavito confessed to more than 190 murders. While investigators believed the number could potentially be much higher, his sentences added up to more than 1,800 years. Although Colombian law limited the actual time he could serve, his case exposed a painful pattern repeated throughout true crime history. People who live on society's margins can become easier targets because their disappearances may receive less immediate attention. Garavito died in prison in 2023. Then came Samuel Little, a man who for decades moved through different parts of the United States, while targeting women who were often already vulnerable or overlooked. Many of the deaths were initially classified as overdoses or accidents, allowing him to avoid detection. His eventual arrest in 2012 came from an unrelated drug case, but DNA evidence connected him to 3 unsolved murders. Investigators then began uncovering links to additional cases from earlier decades. Little eventually confessed to 93 killings, describing victims and locations with details that sometimes matched information unavailable to the public. Investigators were able to verify more than 60 of those cases through DNA and other corroborating evidence, and the FBI identified him as America's most prolific serial killer. His story is particularly haunting because so many of the victims had already been pushed toward the edges of society, where their deaths could be mistaken for something else or simply remain unsolved. Finally, there was Harold Shipman, a family doctor trusted by patients and the community he served. For more than 2 decades, he primarily treated elderly women, and investigators later concluded that he secretly caused deaths while making them appear natural. His downfall began after suspicions surrounding the will of one patient. As police examined the case further, they discovered unusual evidence in exhumed bodies, revealing that something far more serious had been happening under the surface. Shipman was convicted in 2000 of murdering 15 patients, but a later inquiry concluded that he may have killed around 250 people. Hundreds of deaths occurred under his care during the period examined, although investigators could not determine which were natural and which were murders. And perhaps that is the darkest lesson running through all these cases. The numbers are shocking, but each number represents a person, a family, and a life that should have continued. Behind every confirmed case is someone who never got to go home and a mystery that investigators had to piece together, sometimes years or decades later.